Let's look at the rise of Constantine and his conversion to Christianity. Well, Constantine arose in the Roman Empire during a period when the empire itself was beginning to struggle. During the 3rd century, the empire had all sorts of problems. Tax revenues were falling, the coinage had been debased, barbarians terrorized the frontiers. There had been bloody and oftentimes not too smooth succession battles among the Roman emperors, so there had been a series of civil wars that weren't very helpful. Enter Constantine, whose father was one of the leaders in the western part of the Roman Empire. He's from Britain, and when his father dies, the army declares Constantine emperor. Yet there were other claims to the throne in other parts of the empire. The result was a civil war for control of the Roman Empire. When we look back at the period, if nothing else, Constantine was a successful general. He's a true army guy who knows how to fight and get what he wants. Now, a man named Maxentius also claimed to be emperor of the West. Constantine invades what we now call Italy to claim the throne from Maxentius. Constantine's army and Maxentius' army met at a place called the Milvian Bridge outside of Rome in 312. The night before the battle, Constantine saw a vision with a sign of the cross, or a hero. The sources aren't very clear, and it's hard to know whether it's a dream or a vision. But anyhow, he hears a voice that says, "In hoc signo vinces," in this sign you will have victory. Constantine ordered the army to paint the sign of the cross, or the hero, the first 2 letters of Jesus' name, or Christos in Greek, on the shields of his army. And he basically made a deal with God. He said, look, I am going to put my trust in you, and if I win this battle, I will become a Christian. If I lose this battle, then obviously I won't. So what happens? Well, Constantine's army routs Maxentius' army, and he becomes the sole emperor of the western part of the Roman Empire. He saw this victory as a sign of the strength and providence of the Christian God, and he converts to Christianity. Notice that his conversion had nothing to do with doctrine or any born-again experience or anything like that, but only because the Christian God seemed more powerful. For Constantine, the God of Jesus was the right one because he proved powerful on the battlefield. The battles were tests for him and his Christian deity, and every time he won, the more he believed. The fact that he was victorious meant the Christian God was more powerful than the gods of his enemies. So it was not doctrine or displays of charity or anything that led Constantine to become a Christian, but his victory. And in 313, in the city of Milan, he proclaims the famous Edict of Toleration, or the Edict of Milan, which makes Christianity the favored religion of the Roman Empire alongside pagan cults. Now, scholars have long debated Constantine's conversion, especially if it was sincere or not. So let me give both sides of the argument here. Let's begin with the argument for Constantine's sincerity, that he truly wanted to become a Christian because of the religion itself. A few points can be used in defense of this. First, Constantine's family life prepared him to be a Christian. His mother Helena was already a Christian, so he would have been exposed to it from his youth. His father Constantinus Chlorus was a worshipper of the invincible sun, Sol Invictus, which was a new monotheistic cult from about the 270s. Now, it's not too difficult to transition from a solar monotheism to Christianity, from the sun to the sun, and in fact, that play on words works in Greek as well. In fact, there has been found tomb paintings that represent Christ as the sun god, and of course his day becomes the day of the sun, Sunday. There was a tradition in Rome to bow to the sun before one entered the church, which was always westward facing. So in many ways, he was religiously prepared to become a Christian, given his family life. Second of all, Constantine, after he converts to Christianity, seems to take a genuine personal interest in supporting the faith. There are signs that Constantine was personally interested in doctrine. As we'll see, he will lavishly support the church and will build up the church buildings, but he also got very involved in the theological debates of the era. During the great doctrinal debates, he would always try to understand the positions and offer suggestions for overcoming them, styling himself as a theologian. He personally goes to North Africa at one point to broker a deal between 2 rival Christian groups who were debating theology. So he perceived himself as a defender of the faith. He even wrote a sermon that we now call the Good Friday Address, where he tried to offer a defense of Christianity. I should say that the sermon is not very good, and he tries to awkwardly argue that Plato and the Roman poet Virgil had prophesied about Jesus. Nevertheless, he evidently believed that Christianity was a natural end to pagan philosophy, pagan religion, and the emperor's cult. And so he seemed to be personally engaged in Christianity. And so, because he had a growing up that prepared himself for his faith, and there are signs that he showed personal interest, some people argue that his conversion was really quite sincere. Other people argue that Constantine's conversion was not sincere. In other words, he became a Christian to benefit his political career. Now, what evidence does this position harness? First, aspects of his life suggest that some of the Christian message didn't sink in. For example, he had his rival strangled in public, he had his own son killed, he continued to participate in pagan ritual rites after his so-called conversion. He refused to be baptized until his deathbed, but as we had said before, that was actually relatively common at the time. He placed on his royal coins not Jesus, but the sun god, and at the center of the Christian city, he placed a massive statue of Apollo, the sun god. And there were definitely signs he could be superstitious. His mother miraculously finds a cross in which Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem, and so Constantine had a chunk of that true cross split off and embedded in a statue that he commissioned of himself, believing that putting a piece of the cross in a statue of himself would give him powers. One of the classic scenes that demonstrates this mixed feeling towards Christianity is the founding of New Rome, which will become Constantinople, his capital city. He has a procession celebrating the founding of the city, led by Christian priests, but next to them are pagan priests. And they process to the Greek god Apollo, and he offers sacrifices to the gods of all the different pagan religions, with Christian priests singing psalms in the background. So this is a classic mix of paganism and Christianity, and it indicates that he wasn't always the most sincere or thorough in his religious beliefs. Second of all, historians have pointed out that Constantine benefited politically and economically from the inclusion of Christians in the Roman Empire. Recall, the finances of the empire were in shambles before Constantine. He needs a stimulus plan to reboot the economy. Well, where is he going to find such funds? Well, let me provide some background here. Pagan temples had been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. They had accumulated a great deal of wealth in the pagan temples, and they drained resources from the state, as not only was the state giving them funds, but also people were giving them funds rather than to the state. By becoming a Christian, Constantine stripped many of these temples of their gold and jewels, and took those resources by the state, and then used them to support Christianity. And so basically what he did is created a building project that was a boom for the economy. Suddenly everybody was working, building new churches and new halls for this new Christian faith. And they were using they were using funds that wasn't in use at the time because they were stuck in these pagan temples. Furthermore, Christians had been giving 10% of their income to the church, just thus diverting wealth into sort of this shadow institution. Now that money could be administered by the state for the services of everyone. And so he could strip money from the pagan temples and bring wealth in from the Christians. Financially, it was a good deal for him. Likewise, the pagan priesthood were often aristocrats who could have a great deal of power, especially locally. By becoming Christians, he got rid of the clergy of the pagan cults and replaced it with a new set of people who had allegiance to him. Christian bishops were not a particularly strong group initially, especially as they had been persecuted in the Great Persecution. But Constantine could have a good deal of control of them now that he could control their salary and make access to state funds essential for their livelihood. And so he transferred power from a powerful and independent pagan priesthood to relatively weak and compliant Christian bishops, which was a good political move. So Constantine had a lot to gain politically and economically by co-opting the Christian movement, regardless of whether his faith was sincere. So the arguments against Constantine's sincerity was there are certainly elements of his personal life that suggest that the Christian message didn't sink in. And second of all, he had a lot to gain politically and economically from becoming a Christian. So which was it? Was he sincere or not sincere? My guess is that his motives were a little of both. On the one hand, he probably did believe in it, especially after it gave him victory and he rode it to being the sole emperor. On the other hand, I think he was savvy enough to realize that he gained politically and financially by becoming a Christian. So maybe we could say Constantine was a shrewd believer. To fast forward the story, Constantine went on to become the sole emperor of the Roman Empire until his death in 337, a long and prosperous rule. His conversion and actions during his rule changed Christianity forever.